Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha with Ice Cream Fitness here. It is time for part 2 of the Monday Q&A. But hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot first. First question. Do those who have competed in natural feds who have admitted previous use still have an advantage over lifetime naturals even though they may have taken banned substances years ago? Yeah, absolutely. There's a big difference between a current natural and a previous natural. As I pointed out to you guys, it's very, very easy for people to spend half the year juicing and gain a bunch of muscle mass and strength and still pass drug tests without even having to cheat or use short-acting esters or any of that, or any of the complex stuff I've explained, to where if you want to juice right up to the day you're going to be tested, it gets real tricky. But for a lot of those people, it's easy and they still retain a lot of their gains. But that's only talking in the short term. When we talk about this long term, yeah, absolutely. And anyone who has ever used gear and gotten fairly big and strong and come off realizes very quickly that years later they have a big advantage over true lifetime naturals. All right, case in point, I will take a friend of mine who I knew here personally. He just went to a drug-free British national championship. He took 9th place out of a field of 16 guys, and he's in the 100-kilo weight class. So he was right in the middle of the field at a national championship. So he's definitely up there as far as drug-free guys go. I mean, he's obviously not top tier, but to place middle of the field in a national championship, pretty good. He hit a squat of 190 kilos in the 100-kilo weight class. And so let's put that into perspective. That's what he hit. And when I started training again, I think I started training again in August of 2011. And shortly after that, I actually started training then, and I didn't actually start deadlifting until December. And 10 weeks after I started deadlifting again, which is around, I think, the 6-month mark of me starting lifting weights again, I hit a 5-plate per side deadlift for a double, which means I was deadlifting right at 500 pounds. And the same thing, at about the 7th month mark after I started training again, I hit a 4-plate per side squat. So my squat was right up there with what my friend did, and I weighed less than him. I would say I only weighed around 92 kilos when I did that. And keep in mind my level of detraining. I had not used steroids since 2004. Originally, so I'd been off of gear from 2004 on. I had to take 3 years off from training, and I spent 10 months in bed. And in that quick of a period of time, within 6 to 8 months, I was hitting numbers again that are competitive with drug-free powerlifters. Meaning there are meets that at that point where I was at, I could have walked into meets at some of these drug-free meets and could have placed first place at some of the smaller meets with that short of a period of time of training. And by that same token, I know in the same federation he's competing in, I know a world champion record holder. His record bench press is the same bench press that I was benching 3 years after I came off of gear. When I was still training and I was only working out for about 30 minutes a day, because that's all the free time I had working 12-hour shifts at my job at the time, at the corporate job I had. I only had about 30 minutes to squeeze in to go train. And 3 years after going completely clean, I was benching 4 plates per side still. I was squatting 5 plates per side still, which is pretty much what he does at meets. This guy is a world champion. He's barely above that. So that's what I was able to do, only training 30 minutes a day 3 years after coming off of gear. My numbers were competitive with a drug-free national champion in the 100-kilo weight class. This is a world champion. But they were dramatically lower than they were when I was on a lot of gear at the time. So that puts that in perspective for you. And then you have the perspective that we have studies, and I saw a study, and I don't have it handy, but I saw it a while back, where they pulled muscle biopsies of former competitive powerlifters who used steroids who had stopped lifting weights and had stopped using steroids. So none of them had used steroids in at least the last 3 years, and none of them had lifted weights in the last year. And when they pulled muscle biopsies, they had higher muscle fiber density and more hypertrophy in a lot of key muscles than the average gym goer who had been working out for at least 1 year in the gym. And they pulled biopsies and compared them, and they had more development. So even detrained, completely off the gear, and not even weightlifting anymore, these individuals still had superior muscle tissue to currently weight training individuals. So put that into perspective. Yeah, it seems to make some permanent changes. All right, next question. Floor press. Should one touch and go or pause 1 second at the bottom? You never ever touch and go on a floor press. Let me make that very clear. You will hurt yourself. If you ever get any bounce or you're touching and going at the bottom, you're really risking injuring yourself due to your elbows hitting the floor. So on a floor press, you always bring it down controlled. It's a controlled eccentric. You pause briefly for a 1 count and then drive it up from a dead stop. It is very important on a floor press that you drive from a dead stop. That is what the movement is designed for. And if you want to get the most strength and power and development out of it, you pause. And if you want to reduce your chance of injury, you pause. All right, next question. Why do some obese people get type 2 diabetes and others don't? How often they eat versus how much they eat a factor? There are a few factors here. One, obviously, genetics is a factor. How prone you are to type 2 diabetes is a huge factor. Two, again, how much they overeat. And we do know that in sedentary, obese people, fructose intake is a factor. So if they're eating more table sugar and high fructose corn syrup, they're going to have a slightly higher chance also, depending on their genetics. And then we don't know how much they exercise, because some people who are obese are more active than others. You're going to get obese from a caloric surplus regardless, but your level of activity is also a massive factor in how severe of diabetes you develop and what your chances of developing it are. Is a huge factor. So we don't necessarily know how active they are. They might actually be somewhat active or even have a job that requires them to do a little bit of manual stuff and a little heavy lifting and things, or they might be completely sedentary. And so even though they might have the same body weight and same amount of body fat, you can't discount the activity level. So these are other factors involved that we can't always just assess by looking at someone. So I hope that answers that one a bit better. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I got a question regarding aspirin. I've heard bodybuilder pros say that they use aspirin to thin the blood to get more reps in. Is this true and beneficial? Will I grow more muscle mass if I take aspirin before training? No, there is absolutely no truth to this. It will not increase your training stamina. It will not have any anabolic benefits for you. There's no reason for you to be taking aspirin for this purpose. I can tell you why a lot of big pro bodybuilders do it. It's because their hemocrite levels are so high from all the anabolic drugs that they use that they need to thin their blood out a little bit to reduce their chances of getting blood clots and having other issues. So I think it's more to do with their drug use than anything that's going to be beneficial to you. And so, no, absolutely not. Do not listen to this. It is nonsense, and there are actual potential health negatives to taking aspirin every day, which you can go research yourself. All right, last question. Could you explain the parameters of a DE day and an ME day? For example, on an ME day, do you go for a new 1 rep max each week, or do you just go for like an RPE of 9 or 9.5 for that day? Thanks, Jason. All right, if you're talking about max effort systems, I'm assuming you're talking about like the conjugate system here, which is what I use, which is based off of the same sort of max effort stuff the Bulgarians use. So if you're talking about West Side Barbell, or you're talking about the Bulgarian system or anything like that, your max effort day is a rated perceived exertion of 10. You go in and you hit 100% on that lift. Now it might be 100% of a 3 rep max or a 2 rep max or a 1 rep max, but you are working at a maximum rate of perceived exertion for that day. So ideally, when you're running a system like that, ideally you hope to PR, which is what you're trying to do, is to hit a PR. And particularly on like the west side system, you're rotating lifts. You're generally not doing the same max effort variation of a lift more than once every 6 weeks. So, your squat might be with a straight bar or a cambered bar or a safety squat bar. Those are 3 different lifts. If you've got bands on it, it's a different lift. If you've got reverse bands on it, it's a different lift. If you're hanging chains off of it, it's a different lift. So right there, you've got 12 different lifts that you could run through a 12-week cycle, just as an example. And so ideally, every time you repeat that lift, you want a PR on it. But you may not PR, so you either go for a lift where you know that if you add another 5 pounds to it, you're going to fail. It's a true grinder rep, and you know it's a max. Or you go till you fail. So you either PR, you hit a lift that you know is basically a maximum effort lift, or you attempt a lift and you fail it. So that's how this works on a max effort day. Now, a dynamic effort day, you do not use the rate of perceived exertion scale at all. There is no auto regulation on speed work. You work off percentages of your 1 rep max, and then you adjust that based upon bands and chains, and sometimes you rotate it through 3-week waves. And so what you will often do is you'll be working somewhere, depending on if you're a raw or an equipped lifter, or whether it's squat, bench, or deadlift, you'll be working somewhere between 40 and 70% of your max. And that gets really tricky and complicated when you add bands and chains, which you will be doing, but they have charts for that. So no, that is set up on pre-scheduled waves if you pull up any of the Westside templates. So remember, DE is a set structured system. ILME does work on the RPE scale, and ideally you're trying to PR, but if you don't PR, you just try to hit a 10 on the rate of perceived exertion. Or a minimum of a 9.5, but you're going for a 10. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you next time.